Hey everyone, and welcome back to Just Finish Coding. I'm Sriram, and this video is part 4 of the Hangman game dev series where we recreate the famous word game on Scratch. If you haven't watched parts 1 to 3, then click on the card up here. And just a reminder, if you are stuck during any part of video, then you can head over to the downloadable files link in the description box below, download just the file that you need, and then continue. In this video, we will ensure that the user can move on to the guessing stage and actually guess the word. There will be no hangman animation yet, but we will see the correct letters show up when they are accurately predicted. With that said, let's get right into the code. First, we will set up the checker so that the game mode can transition to the guessing stage. On receiving in its circles, go to x215, y-1, and then show. This will be at approximately the center right of the screen. Perfect. On receiving start, add a forever loop. If the game mode is accept, then we will show the sprite, but if it is not, then we will hide the sprite. Next, we must program the code when the sprite is clicked. Usually we can just proceed to the guessing stage, but there is one exception. If the user has not even entered a single letter, then we would want the game to remain in its accepting stage. So, if the length of user input is not equal to 0, then broadcast a new message called create-clones and wait. If the game mode is accept, then we simply set the same variable to be guess. Technically, the second if condition is not needed and we can just switch the game mode directly. Anyway, now go into the dash's sprite. If you see its costumes, you'd notice that it's very vanilla and simple, just a straight line. To the player, these dashes will represent letters of the word that they have not correctly guessed. Okay, on receiving in its circles, hide. On receiving create-clones, we will need to create the clones extremely quickly. For this, create a custom block called create-clones, making sure to run without screen refresh. Place the implementation of the block after receiving the message. Alright, now we must define the block. First, show, and after this, we need a way of differentiating between the clones and the sprite itself. Create a variable called clone for the sprite only. After this, create another variable called cloneID for the sprite only. This will be used to number and index each clone. Set clone to be yes, and cloneID initially to be 1. We must now move the sprite to the location of the leftmost answer key. If you remember from the last video, we saved this location as left answer x. The y position will be -20 so that the dashes are all slightly below the letters. Good, now repeat length of user input. This will return the number of letters of the word. Each time, create a clone, then change x by x width, and then change cloneID by 1. This way, each additional clone created will move to the right and also will have a different cloneID based on its position from the start. At the end, set the clone to be no so that all the clones now are distinguished. Finally, hide. The clones will be shown whereas the sprite will be hidden. Wonderful. Now we go into the answer letters. Follow along for the moment, and after a while I will explain in depth what we are doing. Create a custom block called create show list and letter inputs, making sure to run without screen refresh. Go to variables and create a new list called show list for all sprites. At first, delete all of the list. Then repeat the length of user input each time, adding 0 to that list. Okay, now create another list called letter inputs for all sprites. The same thing will apply, but just change the repeat to 26 and each list instance to be letter inputs. Each index in the show list represents a letter of the word to be guessed. If the player has not yet guessed a letter correctly, then the corresponding item in the list will remain 0. And if the player has guessed it correctly, the value would be 1. For example, if the word was cat, and the player has just guessed the letter C correctly, then the show list will become 1, 0, 0 at that very instant. The letter inputs list will keep track of which letters the user has entered and which ones they have not. If a letter has been entered, it will be set to 1, and if it has not been entered, that corresponding item will be set to 0. Great. Now go to the when I receive create-clones message and then check if clone is no. If this is true, use the function that we have just created. Since the sprite itself and every clone will receive this message and we would want it to run only once, we add the condition at the beginning so that it's executed by just the sprite. Perfect. In the main start script, notice that we repeat until the game mode changes from except. Well, the game mode is going to be guess after this, so we do need to check for some things. First of all, there will be a bunch of unwanted clones. For example, if the word to be guessed is 3 letters, then there is no need for 15 clones. So, if clone ID is greater than the length of user input, delete this clone. Now we must repeat until game over becomes yes. After all, this is where the game will end. Within this, check if clone is yes. If item clone ID of show list is 0, then the clone must be hidden, otherwise it should just be shown. Very simple stuff, especially since I explained about all this earlier. Wonderful, we can now go into the circle sprite because this is where we must detect the user clicking the buttons. First of all, make some space in the start message because here we must program what happens when the game mode becomes guess. We will be doing something very similar with regard to the brightness, but with some small changes. First, get the values in the respective X and Y positions. Then, check if item index of letter inputs is 0 and only then set the brightness. This should make sense. If the player has already clicked a letter previously, then it should not brighten up when the mouse hovers over because it isn't a valid option anymore. Good. Now we must program the important case when the sprite is clicked. First, change the if to an if else because the game mode here is no longer except. Duplicate the code and check if game mode is guess. Again, we can make this an if then because there is no case after this. Alright, get the values at the X and Y positions. Then check if item index of letter inputs is 0. Well, in this case it is a valid input since that particular key was not clicked before. So replace item with 1. Great, now create 2 more variables, both for all sprites. Circle X and circle Y. These will refer to the X and Y positions of the circle that we just clicked. We won't be using them in this video, but it is good to set them up right away. Throw those blocks in and let's continue. Get index at tile X and tile Y, and after that, get the values at that particular index. As a result of these blocks, the letter variable will hold the correct character. Create a condition checking if user input contains letter. Now, create a new variable called next letter for all sprites. The purpose of this variable should be self-explanatory. If this condition is true, then set next letter to letter. Finally, broadcast a new message called show letter and wait. Well, that was a lot of work, but we are almost done. Go back to answer letters and get some fresh space. On receiving show letters, check if clone is yes, and at the same time, if letter clone ID of user input is equal to the next letter. This means that the guess was correct, so replace item clone ID of show list with 1. Test the program out and enter a short word. This should do. And let's try guessing it. Well, that is super disappointing. The program bugs out and it doesn't really work. Get back into the coding area and make the following corrections to ensure it does. First off, I made a small mistake by not changing the second list instance to be letter inputs. Now go into the circle sprite where we program the sprite click. Notice here that we are replacing item 1 rather than item index, and this is the main culprit of all our bugs. Anyway, that is pretty much it. Test the program out and start by entering a simple word. Okay, that works, and now we guess each letter. Bam, they show up when they are correct. This is amazing progress, and soon we can start working on the Hangman animation. If you've enjoyed this video, then please make sure you leave a like, and also don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in part 5.